And we are live right here on the True Mets Talk podcast. It's your boy CP, and we are starting off this week fresh, talking Mets baseball amidst this very quiet time in Mets land. For those of you all who were trying to join up on the stream yesterday, we had some scheduling difficulties, decided to postpone. To be completely honest, I am fighting this flu. It is bad. It's flu season, but you know what? I am powering through, and we are here to talk about some New York Mets baseball. I will not keep you all long on this stream, but we got a couple of topics to talk about in Metsland pertaining to some bats, pertaining to the corner infield situation, and pertaining to the starting pitching. Please, before we get into it, smash those thumbs up buttons, subscribe to the channel, and always, please do drop those comments in the live chat. If you see me taking a sip of water in between this whole entire live stream, again, I am battling the flu, but I am here with you all because the content must go on, and we got to talk about what's going on with our New York Mets. All right, so let's get into it. Again, it's not going to be a very lengthy live stream, but we did have some news yesterday going down that pertains to the New York Mets and one of the starting pitchers that they could have been interested in on a short-term deal coming off the board to the Detroit Tigers, and that is right-handed pitcher Jack Flaherty. This is a name that we've been talking about associated with the New York Mets for quite some time. Perhaps they had some interest, perhaps they didn't. By the time that Flaherty went off the board to the Tigers last night. But again, I see a lot of Mets fans drawing this comparison given the contract details to what Frankie Montas got almost basically 2 months ago from the New York Mets. And if you didn't see the news about Jack Flaherty, here it is per Mark Feinsand. Flaherty will earn about $25 million in 2025 with a $10 million player option for the 2026 season. And that can increase to $20 million if he starts 15 games in the 2026 season. So again, $25 million up front for Jack Flaherty for 2025 to get him in the doors back in Detroit, where he already has some familiarity. Obviously, he spent the first half of last season in a Tigers uniform before he got traded over to the LA Dodgers. And yeah, I mean, this is a no-brainer for him, to be honest with you, and trying to put up another prove-it type of season so he can go back onto the market next offseason and get a payday. And he also has some insurance on the back end of this deal with some nice incentives to get up to $20 million. Now, for those of you all asking why the Mets didn't do this, why they couldn't offer up this kind of money, to be honest, I was interested in Jack Flaherty, even given some of the medical concerns. There were some medical concerns with a bunch of teams that were trying to trade for him last season, in particular the New York Yankees. The Mets were also probably waiting to see if his asking price was going to come down from a multi-year deal earlier in the offseason. And a lot of Mets fans, again, are comparing this to the Frankie Montas contract, which isn't really a good comparison, to be honest with you. Both the value, which is different. Montas is getting paid $8 million less. The two pitchers are not even in the same category. You're talking about Jack Flaherty that can be a number 2 or number 3 in your rotation, whereas Montas is more in line to be a number 4, number 5. And you're talking about a difference in timeline as well, where Montas already signed that contract with the New York Mets 2 months ago. And the way that the Mets were operating 2 months ago, right, that was really the first edition of how they were going to flush out this rotation and kind of put it into a new makeover territory, right? And so at that point 2 months ago, for all we know, Jack Flaherty might have still been asking for a multi-year deal. And so from then on, you can assume that they went the Montas route. They got Griffin Canning on board. They re-signed Sean Manaea, and maybe they're putting their eggs in the basket of Kodai Senga being healthy. Now, we know that this rotation objectively still has question marks. And Flaherty would have made this rotation. He would have probably been the headliner as the number one. Yes, there are still concerns with Jack Flaherty overall, given the inconsistencies that he's had in his career. I know he posted tremendous numbers in a Dodgers uniform and really in the entirety of the 2024 season, but also with the medicals, the innings pitched. Can he be a pitcher in this rotation that's going to take on a lot of innings when you have injury concerns already with Kodai Senga, right? This is all something to consider, and probably what the Mets considered before tossing $25 million up front to a guy like Jack Flaherty. Now, again, I understand it's hard to comprehend that decision given the way that this rotation is looking right now, to which I could just tell you the feeling that I'm getting right now with the New York Mets is this rotation as it currently stands is what we're going to head into spring training and inevitably opening day with. For better or for worse, I'm willing to give it a chance, but I really do think that this Jack Flaherty signing was probably the last chance to add a pitcher into this rotation, because I truly don't see a trade happening. And I'll get into that here in just a second as we talk about that. But really, this was the last chance. Given the years and the asking price going down from a longer term deal, maybe 3 or 4 years to 2 years, that could have played right into the Mets' hands. They chose not to go down that route. The timing wasn't right. The medicals, the type of pitcher that he is, we don't know, right? We don't know exactly why they didn't want to give up the money. But one also thing that I want to point out with this whole situation, we'll see on the next screen here, with the actual luxury tax payroll that the Mets are operating with, is we also have to start asking ourselves in this offseason from here on now, February 3rd until spring training, inevitably opening day, is the remainder of this offseason going to be Pete Alonso or bust? Because we'll see, and by bust, I mean the Mets aren't going to make any moves besides Pete Alonso, right? If Pete Alonso signs, great. If he doesn't, they're going the internal route. And I'm getting that sense and that feeling that this is the route that we could be approaching, right? Because if we're still holding out hope on Pete Alonso, who, by the way, we haven't heard basically any new information from over this past maybe, 3, 4, 5 days, which is kind of interesting and unique within itself. We've heard no additional reports, at least I haven't. You would be looking at $25 million for Pete Alonso, presumably, given the last report of that $70 to $75 million range with the deferments, and also $25 million for Jack Flaherty in the event that they were interested and made the move for that signing, in which you would be approaching Los Angeles Dodgers territory for the luxury tax penalty. Now, I know some fans do not care. Some Mets fans want to go toe-to-toe with the Dodgers in their spending. I'm not sure how feasible that is, and I think the Mets are giving us a real sense that they are not willing to do that in this offseason. And so we have to be talking about this offseason, unfortunately, in a light where the Mets could and might be trying to hold true to that $301 million mark. Now, I'm not going to say and speak on this as a fact because, I could be completely off in this and we could see a big trade. We could see the Mets make a move for Dylan Cease, which we'll talk about here in just a second, to add $13 million, and then also go after Pete Alonso, in which you're looking at a payroll that's probably going to be around $320, maybe $325 million. But again, I really do sense with Jack Flaherty going off the board back to the Tigers, where he has had that familiarity, that we could be getting into this situation where it's Pete Alonso, or maybe you pivot to that veteran infielder, maybe a Jose Iglesias to round out the offseason. And I know that's going to rub a lot of Mets fans the wrong way. Clearly, with the lack of news we've had over the past couple of days, really this past weekend, we haven't heard much Mets. I see some Mets fans and people in this Mets community starting to talk about Anthony Rizzo. That's how bored this Mets community is and how desperate we are for some news. We're getting into the Anthony Rizzo talks as a backup option if Pete Alonso goes elsewhere, which I have no interest in, by the way, but just something to consider. And I wanted to open up that, I guess, perspective to you all, if that's what we're looking at. So again, let me get into some of the comments here as we go line by line, topic by topic. Please work with me. Again, battling an illness here, and it's not fun. It's flu season. Hopefully everyone's healthy. I'm trying to get over it. I'm not going to lie. I'm at like 65% right now, so you can probably hear it in my voice. But we are powering through. Salute to Carlos. Salute to Angelo, Alex, Rock, David. I see you all in the chat. I appreciate it. Carlos saying me neither, CP, probably to the Anthony Rizzo point. I don't want Anthony Rizzo on this team. He's just coming off an abysmal season, 8 home runs, a 228 batting average. I mean, he's 35 years old. There's really no point, minus the clubhouse factor, to be going down that route. I'd rather just go completely internal at that point and see what happens. Or at the worst, just pivot back to a Jose Iglesias and have that be the clubhouse glue guy while teaching the young guys. I'd rather them go down that route. Alex is saying another one bites the dust in terms of Jack Flaherty. I have my reservations as to how interested the Mets truly were in Jack Flaherty, right? Because it really does seem like the Mets are not willing to allocate a large chunk of money from this point on until the rest of the offseason unless that player who they give that money to is named Pete Alonso. So if that's the case, and my intuition is correct, this Jack Flaherty situation, as soon as they learned that, $25 million was on the table for him, they were presumably out. And that's what I think of that. That's really what I think of that. It would have been a very nice addition. He would have been immediately the top line starter in this rotation, given the questions surrounding Kodai Senga's health. But it just seems like right now the Mets are going into this 2025 season with this rotation as is. And I want to touch on that here in a second as we talk about and transition into the Dylan Cease realm. But let's talk about the last really significant news that the Mets gave us in signing second baseman / third baseman Nick Madrigal to a split contract deal. A lot of Mets fans were up in arms on X about this deal. And for those of you all who don't know, it's a split contract deal. So he's going to be in spring training. He's going to be competing for one of those infield spots. Think of an eerily similar situation to Zach Short, if you remember that name, last spring training when he won the job and won a roster spot out of spring training, and then basically had a very short stint to begin the season on the Mets before they let him go. This is exactly how I see this playing out. And after this Nick Madrigal signing, I think it's somewhere just over $1 million. And again, if he makes the team, he'll make a prorated amount. And the prorated amount is for any time that he's in the majors versus the minor leagues throughout the course of the 2025 season. And after this signing, the Mets payroll hit, the luxury tax payroll is up to $298.13 million per Fangraphs, give or take, right? And so for keeping an eye out on that $301 million mark, we're just about $2.5 million away, presumably, before the Mets hit that mark without making any lateral moves, any trades to offload payroll, etc. Quite simple. I don't really have any expectations for Nick Madrigal. He's a player that I haven't really watched closely. I know he's a stud on the defensive side of the ball. A lot of web gems there. He's got a lot of good range up the middle, especially at second base. I mean, he could provide you some versatility in playing third base, but he's not going to give you anything with the bat. And his entire career has basically shown just that. He has speed. I guess he swiped 10 bags in a 2023 season, but the offensive numbers, right, especially with where he was drafted to begin his career, he has not lived up to expectations, bar none. So this is a strict depth signing, and I know that we are, as Mets fans, are really numb to that saying right now, right? It's a depth signing, and just that. And we're tired of it. We're tired of these split contract deals, these minor league deals, et cetera. But they're necessary to fill out the 40-man and provide some competition, in this organization for spring training. But the other piece of this Madrigal signing is that, is this the end of OMG in Queens? Is this the end of Jose Iglesias' time? Is this the backup? And is this the replacement? The Jose Iglesias 2.0, I should say. Now, you could certainly look at it that way, right? Especially if the Mets are banking on Jose Iglesias wanting to start every day on a team in this league, especially if the money also doesn't match what the Mets have lined up for their valuation of Jose Iglesias. And this is kind of where this $298.13 million comes into play, because if they can keep Jose Iglesias, and this is under the assumption that Pete Alonso isn't coming back to the New York Mets. If Pete Alonso does come back to the New York Mets, I have to imagine that there's no room for Jose Iglesias on this team. Maybe there is, given what we'll talk about in the next slide. But again, we'll get there when we get there. But I don't think that Nick Madrigal, in my personal opinion, has anything to do with the Mets being interested in bringing back Jose Iglesias or not. But on the other side of the coin is that we can't forget Jose Iglesias hired Scott Boras. He's coming off of a career year, right, in an unexpected, basically full-time role with the New York Mets in 2024 for a lot of the season. And he's going to want to get paid. And Spotrac has his market valuation set to be $1.5 million. I think that is shorting him quite a bit. And I think that Jose Iglesias, especially given some teams that can be desperate for his services, given what he posted last year, the defense, the bat, etc., getting on base at a pretty high rate, the leadership, the veteran leadership that he could provide, I think he's in line for maybe 2.5, 3, maybe even $4 million. I don't think that's out of the question for Jose Iglesias. And if the price gets that high for him, I'm not going to say the Mets aren't going to do it. But as we just heard, Carlos Mendoza state not too long ago, I believe it was just a couple of days ago, Luis Angel Acuna is going to have a big role on this team in 2025. Now, that could just be Mendoza talking and just saying the right words, right? As a manager in New York, big market, you have to say the right words, especially pertaining to some of these young guys, and what their role is going to be with this team moving forward, especially with so much uncertainty surrounding this team, even still at this point of the offseason positionally. But if I had to guess, if they're not including Luis Angel Acuna in a trade for a frontline starter, he is going to have a very big role on this team. And by bringing Jose Iglesias back on board, you kind of hinder that ability to give him the maximum amount of opportunities and build on a strong season not strong season, but a strong sample size of games, 14 games that he posted for you down the stretch of last season, right? When Francisco Lindor went down with that back injury. So again, there's really nothing that I wanted to say here for Nick Madrigal. I think that he's going to provide a lot of competition come spring training. Could he eventually, if the Mets don't go down the Jose Iglesias route, sneak onto the team in one of the final roster spots, just like Zach Short did? Yes, he could. But at this point, I'm really not anticipating it. And I don't think that this signing means Jose Iglesias is off the board. When Jose Iglesias is off the board for the New York Mets, that answer is probably going to be due to him being too expensive or wanting to play as a full-time second baseman or third baseman somewhere, which at this point, the Mets probably can't guarantee him. That's more of a reason as to why they wouldn't bring him back than them signing Nick Madrigal. So I just wanted to make that well known, because I saw a lot of Mets fans overreacting and basically stating that this is the reason why they wouldn't bring Jose Iglesias back. And I think that's a little bit far-fetched, to be honest. So I appreciate you all being here. A little bit of an early afternoon live stream. Again, apologize about the postponement for the stream last night. I know there was a lot of people anticipating that stream happening between myself and Rob. And even though I am battling an illness, I wanted to make it up to you all and apologize for that postponement and talk about some Mets right here. Shout out to Phil. I appreciate you being in the chat. Please do smash those thumbs up buttons for me. Again, if you're new to the channel, if you're watching this on the replay, if you enjoyed these discussions surrounding the New York Mets, subscribe to the channel and keep dropping those live chat comments, and we'll have a discussion here as best as I can to keep the conversation flowing. Richard saying, forget Madrigal. We should have signed Iglesias. Again, Richard, as I just mentioned, I don't think that either of these guys, are hindering each other. I don't think Madrigal is going to hinder an Iglesias signing, and vice versa. Free up money, trade Marte, McNeil, and Beatty. Easier said than done. The Mets have been trying to trade Starling Marte, and Starling Marte could be one of these roadblocks that the Mets have to fight through in order to get to where they really want to get at in terms of a roster construction standpoint, because he is taking up a roster spot at the end of the day, and he doesn't really have a clear-cut role outside of a platoon DH for the 2025 season. So, and they've tried to. So just saying to trade Marte and McNeil is, again, easier said than done. As a Mets fan, I would love for that to happen. You can free up two roster spots. You can free up some money. They'll still have to pay down a portion of both of those guys' contracts. But at the end of the day, you'd have to also probably give up some heavy prospect capital just to get these teams to sign on and bringing those guys onto their rosters, right? So it's easier said than done. I know in a real world scenario, in a perfect world scenario, I should say, that would be the case, letting go of Starling Marte via trade and maybe finding a trade partner for Jeff McNeil in terms of finding something valuable back for him. But at this point of the offseason, I'm inclined to believe that they've tried and it's just not there. The market's not there. So they're going to roll into the season with both of those guys. We got Jay in the chat, first time here, loving the key parts of what you are mentioning about these signings. I appreciate you, Jay. Thank you so much for being here. Again, for anyone that's new, I try to open up both sides of the fence in terms of a perspective as we talk about the New York Mets and not just focus on one side. Because again, I think this Mets offseason, again, is very unique. And there's a lot of, different scenarios at play and different thought processes at play for some of the decisions. And we are just left trying to pick up the pieces in terms of what they can be thinking, like what's going on inside the mind of David Stearns and what got us to this point with this roster right now. So I appreciate that. Richard, this is what I'm going to get into right now. 2 guys in a trade with the Padres. I did. On my social media, I've actually had multiple trade proposals for Dylan C/Michael King at this point. One of them was, and a lot of Padres fans got on me with this trade proposal. This was on my X account. If you don't follow me on X, you can follow me at True Mets Talk as well as Instagram. Sometimes I'll post some trade proposals One of them was Jake Cronenworth and Dylan Cease coming to the New York Mets in exchange for Starling Marte, Jeff McNeil, Blade Tidwell, and Marco Vargas. And I explained in that trade proposal that this would be in a scenario where the Padres are really desperate to offload money, are desperate to offload the Cronenworth contract, even though it's advantageous in terms of AAV, just paying him for another 6 or 7 years, given their direction as an organization could make sense. And even taking on some money with McNeil and Starling Marte, they would still come out the winners in terms of offloading money, if that's their end goal. Now, again, as we transition into this topic of this Dylan Cease talk, I don't know what the direction of the Padres is, right? I don't know if they're really wanting to compete and be contenders in this stacked NL for 2025. I would imagine that they do. And so that's where I'm kind of on the fence if they're actually going to let go of Michael King, Dylan Cease, or even either of them this offseason, as opposed to waiting it out at the trade deadline and then reassessing. But in addition to that trade proposal, and again, I can go over that trade proposal perhaps in another live stream. I'm not really in, I guess, the proper mindset in terms of the health here with battling the flu to go over that. But it is certainly on the table. Again, if the situation with the Padres is to offload money. Now, let's say there's a situation where the Padres don't want to offload money. They're not concerned about their money. They want to get a infielder, in particular a shortstop, a starting caliber shortstop, while also getting a prospect and an MLB-ready guy in return for Dylan Cease and going down that route. This is the second trade proposal that I posted on my social media and on the community tab of my YouTube channel and what you see on your screen. And I understand that, the text on this screen is a little bit small. So I'll just let you know, in this trade proposal, it would be Dylan Cease coming over to the New York Mets in exchange for Luis Angel Acuna, Blade Tidwell, and Tyler McGill. And I really do think the Padres are wanting to find their replacement at shortstop now that Ha-Seong Kim signed with the Tampa Bay Rays on that 2-year deal. And it's being reported, per Pat Ragazzo, Mets reporter for Sports Illustrated, has been on the channel with Rob and myself talking about this very topic, is reporting that the Padres are reportedly looking for 3 top 25 prospects in exchange for Dylan Cease, right? And so you could go down a million different routes in terms of what the return from the New York Mets could be. And this is just one of them right here. Luis Angel Acuna, who finished out the 2024 season, according to MLB.com, ranked as the Mets' number 12th prospect in the farm system. Blade Tidwell, who finished last season, ranked number 8. Now we're still waiting on the 2025 rankings to begin the season. We don't have those out from MLB.com just yet, but this would be a starting point, because at the end of the day, we have to remember, we have to give to get. If we really want a frontline starter, I see a lot of Mets fans stating, well, we need a frontline starter. We need it. We can't rely on Kodai Senga. Right? We can't rely on Frankie Montas or even Clay Holmes. And by the way, so good to see the Mets, some players being back, in Port St. Lucie, taking the field, taking some reps. Clay Holmes throwing a bullpen today, talking to the media. We saw Ronnie Mauricio out there fielding some ground balls, which is awesome to see. So really good to see. Baseball is around the corner. I was very pleasantly surprised to see Ronnie Mauricio out there amidst all the speculation of how that knee is healing. But yeah, this is the report. 3 top 25 prospects for Dylan Cease. And the Mets certainly have what it takes to make a trade like this happen, right? even if it doesn't include Luis Angel Acuna. I mean, you could talk about Ronnie Mauricio as well. That could fit that bill. And a handful of other potential hypothetical trades. And this is kind of where I wanted to get your thoughts and opinions on in the live chat poll on YouTube. If you're in the YouTube live stream, vote in that poll. Would you include Luis Angel Acuna as the headline back to San Diego in a potential Dylan Cease trade? And to my surprise, I saw Mets fans saying no. They'd rather just hold on to Luis Angel Acuna. And I assume that means you're content with what we got, because again, I think that this would be the likeliest path in terms of obtaining the services of Dylan Cease, is giving the Padres an everyday, young, controllable shortstop in Luis Angel Acuna and making that deal happen. But to my surprise, a lot of Mets fans are saying no. And I believe in Luis Angel Acuna. You know what I mean? And I do think if he sticks in this organization, right, he's going to have a very large role in 2025. And I see a lot of Mets fans on the other side of the coin still not convinced with what he has to offer. Now, keep in mind, we've only saw him for 14 games last season. So small sample size. He was phenomenal at a very crucial time for the New York Mets. But can we see that over the long haul? But everything that I saw from him in that short sample size, I loved. I mean, the quickness of his bat. He's got pop in that bat, right? 3 homers in 14 games. The speed is off the charts. And the fundamentals defensively, they're awesome. So now we have to prioritize, do we like what we see with the upside of Luis Angel Acuna enough to see him taking over a starting role full-time in 2025 and beyond, or do we value that solidified top-line starter in a contending season? A very hard decision to make, not only for us Mets fans, but also for David Stearns. And that's why I tossed up the poll. Because if you asked me, given the needs, I would make this trade. I would 100% make this trade. Even though I love everything that Luis Angel Acuna has to offer, I do think that this rotation would greatly benefit from a guy like Dylan Cease and his caliber leading the charge. But again, I'm getting the sentiment that it's very unlikely. Just as I mentioned with the Jack Flaherty situation for the Mets, I'm getting a sense that it's unlikely for the Mets to do anything with this rotation, at least until the deadline. And there's multiple different perspectives, pros and cons that you can toss out, in that situation. If the Mets wait until the deadline, yes, the asking price of the Padres, if Dylan Cease is still on the trade block, probably diminishes, which is the good thing, right? That's the pro. But the con is that if they have a strong first half, who's to say they just don't keep Dylan Cease to see how their second half goes and just risk losing him to free agency in the offseason? Or, worse yet, multiple contenders at the trade deadline inquire about Dylan Cease alongside the New York Mets, and his value is back at square one, right? Right where it was this offseason. And at that point, for the same value, you are basically paying the same price for half a season versus the full season, which is what I think Rob has been trying to say all along in our Mets Hot Stove. So a lot of things to think about here, but the report is 3 top 25 prospects for Cease is what the Padres' initial asking price supposedly is. I think the Mets have what it takes to get it done. I'm just not convinced that they're going to do it this offseason. I'm not. And I'm willing to give this rotation a chance with what's on paper. I'm not going to just write them off because of what is on paper. But I think concretely, if the Mets are interested, and if they've already called the Padres up and they get a sense that a deal can happen, if this is the starting asking point, right? If the start of the asking point is this deal, Luis Angel Acuna plus another prospect and an MLB-ready pitcher, maybe like a Tyler McGill, I think you strongly have to think about it if you're David Stearns. So we'll see what happens on this trade front. Am I expecting anything to come to fruition right now? No. Would I like to be pleasantly surprised? Yes. But again, we'll see. We'll see. Let me get back into the comments here. A lot of people saying that he's a rental. I guess Cease is a rental and that they wouldn't part ways. I appreciate you, Hector. I am struggling up here. If you guys can't hear it in my voice, I am struggling. This flu is no joke, but I appreciate you. Happy belated birthday to you as well, Hector. Go subscribe to Hector Blunt Thoughts on YouTube. That's my guy. I appreciate you. It'd be saying, I'll drive Acuna to San Diego myself if this is the trade. And again, this is just a starting point. So maybe the Padres, would take Luis Angel Acuna, but they're not interested in Blade Tidwell, and they counter offer with a Nolan McLean, right? This can be reworked in a multitude of different ways from either side. I wanted to introduce this proposal as a starting point. Yes or no? And if yes, who says no in a particular situation? So that's kind of my thought process. But a lot of split opinions is what I'm seeing, to be honest with you. Yamid saying I'd rather trade Acuna over Mauricio. Mike is saying I'd rather trade Ronnie over Acuna. So again, Mets fans, this is the beauty of this Mets fan base, is there's a lot of differences in opinions on this hypothetical situation and which prospect or prospects, you would trade. But again, I appreciate you all being here. Just about 36 minutes into this live stream. Smash those thumbs up buttons for me. Subscribe to the channel for more Mets offseason content news. Soon, that's going to be Mets spring training content on the channel. I can't wait for it. It's going to be a tremendous time. Post-game streams, roster construction streams, projection videos, all that. And we got some projections to talk about here in just a second as well with the PECOTA projection standings that were released as well. So, as I just said, I have a hard time believing the Mets make a move for another starting pitcher. Maybe David Stearns proves me wrong. I'm willing to give it a chance with what we got right now. But if the Mets are in a position where they are in a stronghold of a wild card spot or the division, come the trade deadline, the Mets are going to need to make a move for a starting pitcher. So if it's not right now, we're going to have this same conversation at the trade deadline in hopes of building this rotation into that sustainable, 1 through 5 or 1 through 6 going into the playoffs. And a lot of this season with the rotation, if we're going in as is going to be reliant on the health of Kodai Senga. And I think that's where a lot of Mets fans get kind of uneasy with the lack of, games and innings we saw him pitch last season. But maybe the Mets and David Stearns are really relying on that. At this point, who knows what's running in their heads? We're just trying to connect the dots here on this show. So if the Mets are not, in on another starter, is there room for another bullpen arm? And we've seen the Mets be interested in veteran lefty Tim Hill. We just seen this bullpen beef up a little bit with Ryan Stanek re-signing and adding AJ Minter. You have your solidified top 6 guys in this bullpen at this point of the offseason. Is there room for one more? If you are not going to bring on a starting pitcher, do you just build this elite bullpen that can get through the first half of the season with what we have in the starting rotation? I'm all for bringing on board Tim Hill. Do I think it's going to happen? No. Again, going back to the point of maybe we're at the point of the offseason where it's Pete Alonso and that deal or bust, or nothing's going to happen. It's difficult to say, especially with how in the dark we are right now with this whole Pete Alonso situation. I mean, what's the last report that we heard surrounding Pete Alonso? The past 4 or 5 days has just been like nothing. So I'm kind of on the edge of my seat right now when that passing bomb's going to hit the timeline of where he goes. Because right now it's the Mets or the Blue Jays. The Angels really haven't made a strong offer, and nobody else really seems to be in on Pete Alonso. So we'll see what happens. But these are the numbers with Tim Hill. I already made a standalone video on Tim Hill. If you missed that video, go check it out. I believe it was last week when Pat Ragazzo initially put out the report that the Mets were interested in the Yankees reliever. I should say former or maybe former Yankees reliever. But again, so many numbers to assess here. Really didn't have a good 2023. Had a bounce back in a Yankees uniform in the second half of 2024. The hard hit rate went down. His sinker usage went up tremendously. You see the differential there on the right-hand side of your screen. And he's basically a three-pitch pitcher, but throws two pitches predominantly, the sinker and the four-seamer. And if you bring him on board, you've got your 7 bullpen arms. No questions asked. He takes that 7th spot, and he is the second lefty in the bullpen alongside AJ Minter. And he provides you a vastly different look than an AJ Minter does with the arm angle, with the velocity difference, and also just the pitches, right? And the pitch usage. So, but if you're looking at a situation where Tim Hill is not on the radar of the New York Mets anymore, you're going to have that internal battle for that second lefty spot if the Mets are planning to go dual lefties between Genesis Cabrera, the fireballer, right, from the left-handed side of the mound, and Danny Young, who we saw in 2024. So I'm really hoping that Genesis Cabrera takes that spot. I'd rather see him succeed and take that bullpen spot if we're going down that route over Danny Young, because this is a well-known fact with the way that I talk about this bullpen. I like velocity with these bullpen arms. That's what we get with Reed Garrett. We get that with Ryan Stanek, Edwin Diaz, and that would be Genesis Cabrera. But, if it's Danny Young, it's not the end of the world. It's just I saw a little bit too much of inconsistencies last season with Danny Young for my liking, and I think the Mets could use an upgrade if they are up, to dish out this money. And Tim Hill, he's around 35 years old. He's going to get a 1-year deal, right? It's probably going to be in the range of $5 to $7 million, maybe 8, given the lack of lefties on the market. So maybe that drives his price up a little bit. But he's not going to cost you a ton. He's not getting into the $13, $14 million range. So if you are still interested in re-signing Pete Alonso and you're not interested in bringing in a rotation arm, I would like to see the Mets still be in on Tim Hill. And we know there's a plethora of other teams in this market, including the Yankees, who are interested in re-signing Tim Hill, especially after they lost out on Tommy Kahnle going to the Tigers. But this is something to watch out for. Tim Hill, a potential target still for the New York Mets. Patrick saying Hill was so clutch for the Yankees, even deep into October. 100%. 100%. This guy was a stud in October. He was. I think he had 13 appearances for the Yankees, 1 earned run given up in the postseason. You take a look at the numbers as well in the first half with the White Sox compared to the second half. It's night and day different. Something happened and something clicked for Tim Hill in a Yankees uniform. And, now that Desi Drewskull is on board with the New York Mets, he probably worked a lot with Tim Hill last season, being in that Yankees organization. Now he's on board with the New York Mets as an assistant pitching coach. That could be another connection right there. So I wouldn't discount or rule out a Tim Hill signing for the Mets. If I had to guess, just strictly guessing here, I would still assume that they would go the internal route and there's no more bullpen additions. But if they're still on Tim Hill, I would welcome that all day long. Getting into some of the comments here. Mark is saying Beatty, Tidwell, and McGill for Dylan Cease. I mean, again, Beatty is another guy just like Marte and McNeil, who we talk about that. Of course, when we talk about whether we trade them or want to trade them versus not, we're probably going to lean into the direction of trading them. And I know that McNeil, there's a lot of fans that still want to keep McNeil, which is fine, but maybe more so Beatty and Marte in this instance. But again, taking a look at other teams, do they want these guys? What value are other teams willing to give up for these guys? And are the Mets willing to part ways for that low of value? Presumably, that's a whole different discussion. So if Brett Beatty is a throw-in to get a Dylan Cease deal done, in addition to Luis Angel Acuna or any other prospect that's not named Jonah Tong, right, or Brandon Sproat, I mean, be my guest at this point. Be my guest, because I would like to see a top-line starter. I just don't think it's going to happen. Rotation is set. Richard is saying, I agree. I think the rotation is set. I think the sooner that we realize and come to grips with that, for better or for worse, I can make an hour live stream on why the Mets should add another starter, but I think that as soon as we come to the realization that it's a very good chance, I'll never put it at 100%, but a very good chance nonetheless that this rotation is set, the sooner we can move on to bigger and better things with the rest of this roster. That's how I'm looking at it, at least. That's how I'm looking at it. All right. 45 minutes just beyond on the stream. Last thing here, very early baseball prospectus PECOTA 2025 standings projections. They have been released. And the New York Mets are exactly where they were at last season with 89 wins, according to these projections. Now, PECOTA had, I believe the Mets at 84 wins to begin the 2024 season. So they were kind of high on the New York Mets, even to begin last season, when a lot of Mets fans weren't. And they ended up winning 89 games. So that's a 5-game differential here. They have the Braves winning the division with 92 wins, give or take, 92 to 93. And the Mets taking a wild card spot. They have the Mets also finishing ahead of the Philadelphia Phillies. So when we talk about where the Mets stand with this current roster, are we better right now, all things remaining consistent, than where the Mets were at last season? I think that's going to be highly dependent on Pete Alonso, if he comes back or not. Because if he does, I mean, this team is 100% better, right? But you can make the case that if you switch out, and I don't like thinking about it in this sense. I try to refrain from thinking about roster construction in this sense, but I see a lot of people saying, if you think about it, replacing Pete Alonso with Juan Soto, your offense is automatically better. And that's true to a degree, but the Mets also are 9-day difference stronger in the bullpen category, right? I think at this point, you can make the case that the rotation is a question mark, but so was the rotation going into last season. So that's probably at a standstill. So I think that no matter what happens with Pete, the Mets are definitely a better team than last season, but they are exponentially better if they bring Pete Alonso back. That's my humble opinion, if you're comparing and contrasting the two different rosters. But again, this is way too early. It's February 3rd. These are algorithms at the end of the day, but I just wanted to introduce this to you all as we are approaching spring training, that these PECOTA projections have the Mets as the 4th best team in the NL. And it was a little bit head scratching because I've been saying that they're definitely top 3 behind the Braves and the Dodgers. They have the Cubs winning 90 games and beating out the Mets by a single game in terms of the overall record. So they have the Dodgers at 103, the Braves at 92, the Mets at 89, Cubs at 90, and then the Phillies at 87.5. Surprisingly enough, They kind of shorted the Diamondbacks and the Padres. They have the Padres at like 84. So we'll see what happens out there in the NL West. That's going to be a very tough division. Of course, the Dodgers are probably going to win it, but that's another strong division. But again, it goes back to what the Padres' mindset is when we talk about this very hypothetical trade, right? Are they willing to part ways with one of these guys this offseason? Are they going to wait at the time? I mean, the same thing can be said about the Blue Jays scenario with Vlad Jr. That extension deadline is coming up very soon. We're about 2 weeks away from seeing if Vlad Jr. is going to play in the 2025 season under a new contract or in a walk year. And maybe the Pete Alonso situation, I can't count this out. Maybe the Pete Alonso situation drags out into that 2-week mark, depending on what happens with the extension talks between the Blue Jays and Vlad Jr. So many question marks. It's absolutely insane that it's February 3rd and we have so many question marks, not only with the New York Mets, but with multiple different teams around this league surrounding some huge names on the market. I mean, Bregman is still out there. The Tigers just gave $25 million to Jack Flaherty, as we talked about right here in this topic. Does that take them out of the Alex Bregman sweepstakes? Given their history and payroll, I would assume so. Maybe the Red Sox can swoop in. So many different scenarios playing out. But again, as it currently stands, as is, Baseball Prospectus, the PECOTA projections are predicting the Mets winning 89 games. And again, I'm fully on board with that. I think the Mets are going to be a top 5 team at least in the NL. I think that if Pete Alonso is brought back, they're a top 3 team in the NL. And at this point, accepting perhaps what the fate is of this rotation being what it is right now on paper, with the offense as constructed, with Pete Alonso back, I'm willing to take a chance at this point when we have no choice because it's David Stearns' decision ultimately, but I'm willing to take a chance to see how this rotation does for the first half of the season. And then we can wheel and deal at the deadline, hopefully in a good spot to make a strong push into October. So let me know what you think in the comments, Mets fans. If you're over on X, come over to the YouTube, subscribe to the channel. You know, just because you didn't drop a comment in the live chat doesn't mean you still can't comment. There's going to be a regular comment section as soon as this live stream is done. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on anything we talked about today in those comments. Hit the like button on this stream if you enjoyed the discussions. I try my best to open up a multitude of different perspectives for you all on what can happen. I can't speak in absolutes here because clearly, you know, after Juan Soto, nothing has been absolute with the New York Mets. But at the end of the day, that's the beauty of baseball, and that's the beauty of the offseason. The most important thing is that, you know, championships aren't won in the offseason. They aren't. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what the Mets do. Is it Pete Alonso or bust for the New York Mets? Do they have another move up their sleeves, even outside of Pete Alonso? And whenever Pete Alonso signs, we will be live on this channel breaking down that signing and what it means for the New York Mets, whether he is going to be playing in Queens or maybe even Toronto. Regardless, we'll be here on this channel. Again, follow me on all my social media at True Mets Talk, Instagram. I'm over on TikTok too, on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Subscribe to the channel. And I apologize about any audio difficulties. Again, if you can't tell, battling an illness, but we are here talking about the Mets. Show must go on. And yeah, I will leave that. I'm getting to some of the comments here. I think that's about it. Yeah, I appreciate you all. I'm gonna I'm going to cut the live stream here. It's been a pleasure. I will catch you all on a future stream. Again, any breaking news comes out surrounding the New York Mets, we'll be live. So hit the notifications button. It's your boy CP. As always, let's go Mets. Keep the faith. It's going to be okay. Catch you all later. Peace.